I've been making Mantle clocks for a number of years now. They're typically veneered, and they're veneered over usually an MDF base. And I struggled a bit with how I would make the components of the clock and make room for the glass and the mechanism and everything. I finally settled on making clock faces by just doing inkjet printing on photographic quality paper. And if you use glossy paper, I mean, they pretty much look like they're enameled metal. It's hard to tell the difference. There's a design that's a little more unusual.
Can I interrupt for 1 second to ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
So I don't know if that's a standard, but I'm looking at it and 12 is upright, 1 is diagonal, 2 is diagonal, 3 is kind of at 90. Then 4 kind of flips 180 on me. Is that the way all clocks are? And I've never noticed it, or are they generally like the numbers are vertical?
No, it varies a lot. So you look at the one on the left here.
Yeah.
These are both my versions of classic Art Deco clock faces. And I downloaded onto my computer a couple of different Art Deco fonts. So it does vary. And I do these, oddly enough, I do them in PowerPoint because it's easy to manipulate, to draw circles and manipulate the fonts by moving around text boxes. So rather than doing them in Adobe Illustrator or something like that, I just do them in PowerPoint and do a high quality photographic print, and they wind up looking fine. So there has to be space in the back for these little movements. It's funny, I've searched for high quality clock movements, and it seems like pretty much everything that's out there is on the order of 15 to 25 bucks, and I haven't had any fail. So I don't know what constitutes a high quality movement anymore, if it's a quartz movement, not a mechanical one. I've made a couple of clocks using antique mechanical movements, which feels very special, but the movements, if they're high quality and they've been restored, the movements are hundreds of dollars. So, whereas, I can use these and make the clocks affordable. So this is how I figured out how to put them together so there would be space for the hands and space for a glass. And basically I just laminate a bunch of MDF. So there's, space in the back, spacer for the clock mechanism, and then the clock face itself, and then a spacer for the hands and for the glass, and then the front. And, when it's all done, I can either veneer or paint the interior of that space where the clock face is. And then veneering the rest of it is pretty straightforward. For the curved surfaces, I use a hot press veneer glue. So I'm just ironing that on. And then I do a cold press for the rest of it. I also have made a bunch of these smaller desk clocks. I found some 2 1/4 inch inserts that I liked that were simple enough and didn't look cheesy. And I've made many of these over the last few years.
Bill, I have a question about the round clock faces. When you're doing the veneering, it sounded like you veneered up the round outside face first, and then you did the flats. Does it matter?
Yeah. Well, the only, if they're done really well, I think it doesn't matter. because when you're all done, if you break that edge, you can't see the veneer seam.
Mhm.
I've occasionally done ones where I used a different species of veneer on the outside than I did on the front. And in that case, I think I would, for aesthetic reasons, I'd want to do the outside first and then the front. But in a case like this, I don't think you can tell. For example, down here, you know, I know that this isn't a real close-up, but I don't think you could tell which I did here. And by the way, I have to confess that I've taken to using, for veneering edges like this, fast track double-sided tape instead of veneer glue. The stuff is incredible. I mean, you can't remove the veneer from the substrate once it's stuck on there with that stuff. And it just makes it so easy to do. Otherwise, you know, you're trying to do you know, a cold press on the edges, and it's just it's a pain in the neck. Whereas I can, you know, veneer all the sides of a piece like this in an hour. I'm not by nature impatient, but you know, being able to move things along like that, if I'm trying to do a single project, is you know, it's desirable.
I've never done any veneering. I'm really curious. So, when you put the veneer on, you overshoot with the veneer and then you trim it down
Yeah.
with an X-Acto knife or with a little plane.
Well, if you're experienced doing this, you actually do with a veneer saw.
Ah,
So there are these little sort of semicircular
mhm.
saws, and if they're sharpened properly, they do a flush cut on one side, and you know, 2 or 3 strokes and you're through. You can do it with an X-Acto knife or something like that, and I think a lot of people do. But I tend to do it with a veneer saw, and then you know, it's probably overhanging when I've done that by, you know, maybe a couple of hundredths of an inch, and then I just break the edge with a little bit of sandpaper, and it's flush and the joint's invisible. I'm not real expert at doing veneering, and I don't have a vacuum press or anything to do big pieces, but I do small things all the time, and I really like it. I mean, it's a wonderfully efficient way to use really unusual figured wood.
Mm-hmm.
This stuff is actually bird's eye and negre that I bought a large lot. I think I probably got 20 sheets for about $20. And the sheets were all about like 10 inches by 16 inches or something like that, or 12 by 16. And I don't know how you would make anything like this, or, you know, something that's using burl out of, you know, using any approach other than veneering.
And you typically glue everything onto MDF?
Yeah, I sometimes use plywood, but with plywood, you need to do something with the edges, because things telegraph through veneer. So people who veneer onto plywood will typically put 2 layers of veneer on the edging. And the only disadvantage of MDF, other than it being, you know, just nasty stuff that you really don't want to breathe in, is that it's heavy.
Right.
So a clock like this, instead of weighing 5 pounds, might weigh 10 pounds. But if somebody's going to set it on their mantle, I don't think, you know, doesn't matter very much.
Phil, you said that to glue the front face on these clocks, you used an iron, you used, I presume you used hide glue, and then you melted the hide glue. Is that what you did?
No, I use
How did you do it?
veneer glue. So I attached the inkjet printed face to a piece of 1/4" MDF using veneer glue, and it doesn't bleed through or anything.
What I meant was the actual veneer around the outside.
That's all done with cold pressed veneer glue from a place called Veneer Supplies. It's great stuff. You keep it in the clamps for 30 to 45 minutes, and then you take it out of the clamps and it cures over the next number of hours. And it's very, very rigid. So if you're joining pieces of veneer together, they won't separate. And the only instance I've had of a veneer failure, I made a puzzle table for someone, and she put it in a place in her house where it was in very strong direct sunlight for the entire summer. And I had some of the veneer curled and cracked. But I actually think that was more the veneer drying out because it was getting so hot than it was the glue failing.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't quite scold her, but I said, gee, you really, you can't put any kind of wood furniture in,
The sunlight.
direct sunlight like that for hours. You cook it. It's just not good for the wood.